Hey there, Wendy Renee here. Welcome back to my channel. So unbelievably excited to introduce you to one of my most bestest friends in the whole world. And we had a 20-year gap in our friendship due to indoctrination. He is an ex-pioneer, ex-Bethelite. There's a little bit of all of us in these stories. And just a little bit of backstory, I went to pioneer school with Steve. And I just fell head over heels for him as a human being. And you'll see throughout the story where life took us, how it took us on different journeys. But after I woke up from the religion, he was one of the first people I could not wait to reconnect with. I had a lot of apologizing to do. And interestingly, all of the people that I have apologized to for shunning them and succumbing to the coercion that is in that religion have all been welcoming. I'm really, really grateful that Steve welcomed me back into his life. I am so blessed to have been able to leave thanks to YouTube videos like this and find the courage. And it is with my sincere hope that you find yourself in these stories and you also can find the bravery and the courage to leave and go against the grain that is in that religion. I'm gonna let Steve tell his story. Let's go. Before we get into it, first I want to thank you so much for subscribing. We just recently hit 1,000 subscribers. Really excited about that. Be sure to hit that little bell at the top so that every time I do post a video, you are the first one to know. You'll get notifications at the top of your little YouTube app. And as always, there is a little community over there on TikTok where we have a lot of interesting discussions in the comments about various topics. Steve, it is so awesome to have you back on. Can't wait to hear the rest of this story. So we left off where you have this wonderful husband, you're getting married, but there were some things in between that are really significant. So catch us up.
20 years in between. So when I left home, if you watch the other video, I talked a lot about how my belief systems were so shaken that I put a hard stop on anything that I believed, as a Jehovah's Witness, and I put a big green yes on anything that was not. And so I'll just preface all of this. I'm going to talk about my journey as a drug addiction and as an alcoholic, and then post in recovery. I've been sober now for almost 12 years. I'll have 12 years at the beginning of next year.
Congrats.
Thank you. But it took a lot of drugging and drinking to get there. But then it took a lot of work to spin that around. But I think that a lot of my stability as an adult comes from both my experiences as a drug addict and then getting help on the other side of that. When I left home, I had this whole attitude about things and experiences that I was very much open to doing whatever. So I had like a very yes, I'll try that kind of attitude. Now, that being said, I don't think that, I'm kind of a believer in that you're born with the disease of addiction. And I do think that my circumstances kind of brought it to the forefront a little faster than normal. Like if you look at my family history, like my parents were both overweight and they're like compulsive eaters. So there was addiction runs in my family. It may not have exhibited itself as drugs and alcohol as Jehovah's Witnesses, but it exhibited in other ways. So when I left, all of these feelings that come along with it, right? And me as a kind of emotional infant at the age of 20, because we're not really given the skill sets to deal with emotions outside of the framework of being a Jehovah's Witness. Right. So here I am. I've now been abandoned by my family. I've been abandoned by my entire community. There's not a single person in my life that I know from prior to like a month earlier, right? And I'm just like, I felt like a new person, like a new, I don't know, like I often thought about this as like my life was in movies and like that first movie was over, it was done. And now I was on to the second movie and it was like a whole new character. Like this movie had nothing to do with this movie. So it's not even a sequel. It's just like a whole nother movie, just the same actor.
Yeah, the way that you tell it, it's very much like an entirely different life even.
Yeah. So dealing with all of that abandonment, dealing with all of those feelings, dealing with all of that newness, and trying to like figure out my place in the world with my limited skill set, I was introduced to alcohol early on, and my first drink was a blackout drunk, and it was a blackout drunk because when I first had that drink and I started to get drunk. Now, mind you, I'm sure I had a drink prior, but I'd never been drunk. I just recently started having sex. Like I had never smoked a cigarette. And so here I have my first drink. I get my first drunk, and I am immediately all of the feelings, all of the things, all of my family, all of my community, all of my limited life skills, all of that, all of those worries are turned off. So I discovered this amazing off switch, and I didn't realize that was what was happening at the time. But I can look back on it now and be like, oh yeah, absolutely, alcohol and drugs saved my life, because I don't know how a 20-year-old kid that has no experience, no community, no support system, no help was going to manage and deal with all of that. The only way I could do it was to just turn it all off. And so that's what I did. Like I found that switch and I leaned on it and I leaned on it and I leaned on it. There was not a single day in my adult life until I got clean that I wasn't some type of inebriated. There was alcohol, there was cocaine, there was GHB, there was crystal meth, there was ecstasy, there's lots of marijuana. I mean, it was anything and everything to take me outside of my present so that I could relax, so that I could be, I don't know, just not in my head, right? Because unawares to me at the time, like in my head was full of trauma. In my head was full of like heartbreak. And so I needed it. I needed it to function. And I functioned. Like I put myself through college. I finished that 2-year degree and I went on to get my 4-year degree at a school in New York City. I started working in advertising shortly after graduation. Like I was ambitious because part of that attitude of like, well, I'm going to open myself up to all these experiences also had a little bit of like, well, fuck you, Jehovah's Witness, fuck you, family. Like, if you've told me that I'm gonna flounder out here, I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna show you how good I'm gonna have it.
Wow.
And all the while, I'm also playing into the whole stereotype of like, you're gonna leave and become a drug addict. And I totally did.
I mean, a little bit. Way to help us all there, Steve. Way to help us all.
I don't know.
Look at Steve. Look where he ended up.
Well, look. One, I was an addict. Like I'm an addict. That's fine. Like it's part of like, it's part of who I am. But I also, I was given no support system.
Right.
Like literally thrown out. I lived in my car for a few months, like out of my car, not literally, like I didn't sleep in my car, but like I slept on people's home, like people's couches, like this. And I went from having a loving bubble to having nothing.
And was part of you still kind of afraid of because we were taught to be afraid of the world. So was part of you still kind of afraid, even though you were saying yes to everything? The indoctrination doesn't just leave you because you decided it does.
I don't know. I think for me, it kind of did. Only in the sense that like, if I associated it with, like I did that complete 360, wow. Like, not 360, 180. If I did a 360, I'd be back. I did that complete 180 where it was like, well, if the organization said that it was wrong, then maybe it's right. If the organization said it was right, then it must be wrong. So I had that very clear relationship to that thinking for myself. And I also was finding that everything that they said about people in the world was complete bullshit. Like the very first person I ever came out to, like, and told like openly that I'm gay, was this girl that I'm still very good friends with. Her name is Jillian. And like her immediate response was like, oh, that's fantastic. And when I told her that my parents could kick me out, she was like, oh, then you're going to come sleep on my grandpa's sofa. Like she did not know me. And she took me in. My family and community that knew and loved me said, sorry, can't have anything to do with you. So like I was immediately being shown in the beginning that like, oh, everything that they've told me is some bull. And I'm not afraid of these people. So yeah.
Wow. So you were open
I was,
to the possibility that they were wrong about other people, and that
yeah.
if you
I
let
mean,
yourself let someone in, and they
it
demonstrated it.
and it just keeps being proven over and over and over again
Right.
in life that
Right.
like people are not bad. The
Mhm.
world is not scary. I mean,
Mhm.
of course, there are scary things that happen in the world,
Mhm.
but not any scarier than some of the things that happen as a Jehovah's Witness.
Right,
So,
exactly. Yeah, and it's interesting. I had a therapist say to me once, and she was a witness therapist, and she said to me, Jehovah's organization is not the safest, but it's safer. Like,
then what?
then
Then like,
what are
then
you
I guess
talking about?
being human
Than
trafficked.
the world, I guess.
Yeah,
Safer
I know.
than the world. I don't
Right.
know.
But I mean, it's such a, I don't know. It's just such a you, when you leave the organization, you have so much choice around what you will and won't do, what you can and can't do, what you know, where you put yourself. You know, I ended up I put myself into even though I had a drug and alcohol problem, I surrounded myself with people that cared about me and loved me, you know, for the most part. And I never felt like I never felt like I was alone the way that I felt like I was alone as a Jehovah's Witness. Because the aloneness for me as an LGBT person was very much wrapped up in I can only show you this part of me.
Mhm.
Right. And now here I am as an out person showing worldly people my true self, and they're all like, oh, that's totally great. I love you. And so what a difference that made to me. And it was because I had the whole LGBT angle, I think that it really helped me to break out of any of that thinking.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was a drug addict. I didn't really realize it for a long time. You know, because I was able to do all these functioning things. I put myself through college, and then I started working. I started working in a really nice advertising agent, a really big advertising agency in New York City. Turns out I was actually really very talented in graphic design as an artist, and so you know, one
And he
morning,
makes fun of me for using Canva,
yeah,
viewers, just so you know.
totally.
I
So
use
designer.
Canva.
You know, I just think gosh, one of the things that I'm really proud of myself for is my creativity and my ability to think outside the box and to help clients realize their creative potential, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that would have been quashed.
All of it.
I would have been cleaning carpets.
Well, you also are an empath, and you also have
Yeah.
this unique sense of understanding people, and you were like that even as a witness. You were like that. You were able to relate to people and their struggles, and that was one of your gifts, but it was silenced uh,
I never had
in the most brutal way.
I never had any serious Bible studies though, so
Well, good.
sorry, it's a total side note, but remember we were talking about like like you'll get up to the door and you'll do that. You learn the subtle art of quiet knocking.
The subtle art, or the pretend doorbell.
Yeah. No, oh no, beware of dog sign. I couldn't possibly go in there.
There's no car in the driveway. We really aren't gonna, he's mowing his lawn,
Yeah. Oh,
you
that's gonna
know.
be a no. Yeah. Oh
Or
man.
my favorite was when they had an entryway that you had to walk into, to like a porch,
Yeah.
to get to their
And
front
you
door.
close
So
the porch, yes.
you're knocking on the porch. Oh no,
Yeah. Yeah. Make sure
it's
that
not at
noise.
home. And then the worst was you'd go out the following week and you'd have to do those same not at homes.
I know. Well, that's the way. It seems so messed up right now as you think about
Yeah,
it.
weird.
Everything in your body is being this is not right, and yet you would push through it, and you would have to have these days of courageousness, and
Mhm.
those would be the days that you're all right, I'm going to go to that door and I'm going to give them my spiel. Um,
You know what's crazy is that I actually loved field service. But I
really.
think the amount of time that I counted wasn't actually the amount of time
Mhm.
I was preaching. I got so fat as a pioneer because of the amount of breaks that we went on, and
Yeah.
wasting gas money, and just, oh my gosh. I think because we traveled the Garden State Parkway, we would leave tracks in we'd go to the bank and we leave a track in the chute thing.
Oh, really?
Oh my God, we would leave
And that
tracks
counts
at toll
as
booths.
time.
Oh, it was awful, just awful.
Or you're on a break, and just to keep your time going, you're like, somebody jump out and hand that person a track.
Yes, all the time in the parking lot. And can you imagine being on the receiving end of that? Okay, but I have to confess something. In my congregation, I spearheaded cemetery witnessing. You talk about capitalizing. Yes.
Oh, that is so awful.
And then I would ask for their addresses, dude.
Yeah.
So these people are grieving their loss, and I would just say, hi.
Well, you took what you knew about human beings and married it with your belief about Jehovah's Witnesses, and you used what you knew that was good for evil.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, I'll never forget it. One of my, I want to say best clients, because the BE book is like a really great sales book, but one of my best return visits, her name was Anna, and she was in her late 70s, and she was from the Ukraine. And she would tell me stories about how she lost her mother and her sister in World War II, and she was running from the Nazis, like all these stories. And here's 19-year-old me being like, so in 2 Timothy 3:1-5, like thinking I could teach this woman a thing or two. Meanwhile, she has all, like, her furniture was wrapped in plastic kind of a woman. Like she had the strawberry shaped hard candies. Like she was that woman. Yeah. And I look back and I cringe at the things I thought I knew better than
you knew better than her. Yeah,
absolutely.
Her extreme lived life experiences and your limited Bible knowledge was going to.
Well, I'm talking to her about persecution that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And she's like, bitch, let me tell you about persecution.
You know, I was in a concentration camp.
Right? And I'm like, what? Oh, God.
Yeah.
Awful.
All right. So where were we?
You were high.
I was using my addiction the way that I knew how, and it was happening subconsciously, and it was all in the guise of like keeping me safe emotionally, because it would shut me off, right? I surrounded myself with other alcoholics and addicts, and so I'm still friends with most of those people today, but like there was still always this idea that, well, if everybody else around me is doing it, then I'm not doing anything wrong, right? During this time, so when I left home, I had made a real clear proclamation about my relationship with God. I was like, Jehovah does not exist. God does not exist. I don't want, religion is awful and religion is bad. Christianity is destroying people, destroying families, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was done. I was a devout atheist, and I was done with any type of belief system that included God. And I only mention that because I have to bring it back around when I get sober. So you know kind of where I was. Yeah. Drugs, I don't know, drugs were the more you do them, the more it becomes just a part of who you are. And so I may have started because I wanted to stop feeling a certain way, but I continued because it was what I knew how to do. And you never start thinking, oh, well, at least I didn't start. I didn't start thinking, oh, this is going to be a problem. I started, and I would use, and I would pick up, and I would get drunk, and I would get stoned, and I did all those things because I was having fun, until it wasn't fun anymore. And then it was a necessity. And then I couldn't go to a social function without getting drunk. I couldn't go to a bar without getting drunk. I couldn't go on a date without getting drunk. I couldn't go to a party without getting high. It started out as fun, and then it just, gradually became so entwined with who I was as a person.
It became your personality, you mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It became my identity. And I would have never said at the time, maybe towards the end, but not during the bulk of it, I would have never said oh, I'm Steve, I'm LGBT, and I'm a drug addict. It would have been no, I'm Steve, I'm LGBT, and I like to have fun. I like to go out. I like to go to parties. I like to do, I'm having fun. I'm having a good time. All the while though, I kept managing to keep all the functioning parts of my life in play. And that was how, I justified, it doesn't matter what my drug use looks like, what my alcohol use looks like how many coffee tables I've fallen through this week. As long as long as I have like these things on paper. So like I was going to school, and then I was graduating from school, and then I had a job, and I was showing up to work, and I had a really
Right.
good job. I had an apartment, and I would pay my bills kind of sort of on time. I was a young person still, and so like I had all these things that looked like a semblance of life, but meanwhile, like a normal day at work for me would be I would go to work. This is when I worked at the advertising agency. I was in New York City. I would come home, and on the way home, I would stop at the little wine shop around the corner. I would pick up 3 bottles of wine, one good one, 2 bad ones, 2 cheap ones, and I would drink all 3 of them and smoke a couple bowls of pot before passing out in front of the TV. Wake up at 5 a.m., get to the gym at 6, run off all my alcohol, and be ready for work. If I was like hungover from like partying, I would bring vodka with me to work, vodka and mouthwash, because the hair of the dog stuff. So like there was a lot of it just was my routine. It's just what I did. And I didn't really start to think it was a problem until I started getting it, even though that was like that, like looking at it now, I'm like, oh, that's a lot and that's a mess. But I didn't start realizing it was an issue until I started getting into harder drugs. Now, of course, I had done harder drugs earlier on. So, I had tried crystal meth, I tried GHB early on, and I loved them. I loved, like, talk about being outside of yourself. This was not only, like, did I not have to think or feel, but I could have the personality that I didn't think I had, which is ridiculous because I am funny and outgoing and good looking, but if I do say so myself.
So what's the problem then?
Well, so the GHB and the crystal meth made you feel like so funny and so interesting.
Did I say you were humble in my intro? I may go back.
Oh, in this intro, I don't know. Shut up. So like the hard drugs I would put aside for special occasions and stuff, because if I did the hard drugs, it was going to mess with that pile of things that remained in balance for my semblance of life. So the job, the house, etc. So the biggest hurdle for drugs for me was that I was coming down from drugs was messed with my work schedule. I couldn't show up to work if I was coming down, and so I had the idea that I would just stay high, and that's how I would. Like that was my big idea. Like I'm gonna just stay high, and I'll show you how to do it. I'll just show up at work. Nobody will know.
Right, nobody will know.
And so I did. I started showing up high. I got loaded in 2006, and I stayed high for another 5 years almost. What that looked like in that period of time where I was a daily crystal meth and GHB user, it looked like a lot of messiness in my life really unraveled quickly. And I'm kind of only breezing through my addiction piece because I don't know that it's necessarily relevant to my journey as an ExJw's witness. It just so happens to be a part of who I am as Steve, a human being, that it's just part of my identity.
Well, we love all the versions of
Yay.
Steve.
So the end of my drug use looked like me homeless. I'd lost that job. I was homeless in New York City. Again, not street homeless, but like I had a bag and a box worth of stuff, and that was like everything that I had built up. Like I had a really good job, and I had a nice apartment, and I lost it all. I had been reduced down to a bag and a box, and it was all because I just kept like putting equity in that, the drugs and the alcohol. Like I couldn't stop building that side of my pile. So ultimately I got sober in a 12-step program. I had such a hard time with a 12-step program because what I knew of a 12-step program was that in the steps they mentioned God a lot. And now here I am, 10 years an atheist. And I'm like, if this is the solution for me to stop using drugs and alcohol, then like I don't want it. Because I had been in a cult. I had been in a cult for 20 years. Like
and God didn't answer you.
Right. I'm not like God doesn't give like answer anything. There is no such thing as God. like this isn't going to work. But also, like, it looks pretty culty too. Like, you people all get together, you go to meetings every day, you're saying the same thing over and over. Like, this feels very reminiscent of being.
I was wondering how that ended up
Oh yeah,
not
it's
triggering. Yeah.
very reminiscent of being a Jehovah's Witness. And I was like, no, not for me.
Because aren't there rules in place too?
Well, so here's the difference though. There are suggestions in place, and unlike being a Jehovah's Witness, if you don't follow the suggestions, the only person that you're accountable to, really, at the end of the day, the only person that faces consequences is yourself.
I see.
So like, there's no one there that's going to be like judging you for, it's your journey, right? Which is very unlike your journey as a Jehovah's Witness. Like, you're not on your own journey, you're on somebody else's journey, you're on the governing body's journey. You're on, So I looked at those steps, saw the word God, and was like, nah, not for me. Until finally, like, there was literally nowhere else for me to go. Like, I had burned every bridge, I had tried every other, solution. I was so wrapped up in my life of drugging and drinking that I couldn't find a solution. Very, very end, I was overdosing with the intent of killing myself. And I would wake up in tears after coming to, because I had failed. And so like going back to like that whole idea of like being a failure at something, and it's like, oh, what I just like, why can't I get this right? Because so much of my life at this point had been like, well, I had shown my family that like I'm independent. Like, I put myself through school. Like, I got my own apartment. Like, I figured out like banking and finances. Like, I did all the stuff that your parents are supposed to help you with, and I did it on my own.
And all this time, no contact from them, no reaching out.
No. I mean, there was a few, like, of course there's a few times, like, and I held on to that a lot. Like, there would be, since we're talking about my using, like, don't get me high or drunk and start talking about family, because I will go off and it'll be either, most of the time it wasn't raging, but more like I would be bawling. I would like, don't ask me over to a party and then start talking about family.
Well, isn't it true that if you, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the addict's brain, if you do start talking about those things, it's almost like that part of your brain is still trapped in that time period. Your brain is kind of
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because I turned that switch off. I turned that switch off with the drugs, and so like, not until I started living in the present and dealing with those issues, did any of that get resolved.
I see.
Contact with my family was limited. At this point in my life, there was still a lot of holding on to hope that like, if I remember at one point in like 2006, I was like, well, I'm going to do this thing where I just write to my mom every couple of weeks. I'll write her an email and just tell her what's going on in my life, so that way she knows that like the door is always open for her to get in touch with me. And like, my responses would be, every once in a while she would say something back. Most of the communication from my family came in the form of, there was some mail that was sent to the house, or I didn't pay a student loan, so they would get a notice. I mean, I would find out after the fact that my brothers and sisters were married, having kids, etc. So like, I would get like the obligatory like phone call about like, oh, I just want to let you know your sister got married, blah, blah, blah. Like, maybe something like that. But mostly I feel like I don't think that they ever reached out to me. It would be, if I were to reach out to them, then they would tell me that something had happened in our life, right? It's not the only time that they'll ever reach out to me is if somebody dies. And so I've got a couple of those calls over the years. But again, it's very much like, they're not interested in my life. Yet they've never been interested in my life. And this is where it gets weird, because it's like, I know that they love me and I know that they care about me, but because of the hold that the religion has on them, they can't. Right, and so they can't.
And they think that this is love.
Yeah, they're being loving.
Yeah, it's just.
And here's the thing, though. Like, it doesn't. I was caught in this for a very long time. Like, they think that they're being loving, and I understand that because I used to live there. Right, I used to be there, and so therefore I would give them a lot of passes on like, well, I understand, and so therefore I can't be angry with them. Right, like, I can't be angry. They're just doing what they're they're supposed to be doing. And it took me a very long time to get into the anger phase of it and be like, no, that is unacceptable. It is unacceptable to throw your child into the world, like not the Jehovah's Witness, worldly, but just out, throw your child out and be like, you're on your own, figure it out, like figure it the fuck out.
Right.
That's not acceptable. It is not acceptable under any circumstance. When you as a young person are sitting there and you cry yourself to sleep around the holidays because all of your friends have gone home to visit their families, and you're like, well, I'm just going to stay at the dorms because I have nothing I have no family to go home to. Like, that is unacceptable. Like, that kind of damage that you're doing to someone's psyche is unacceptable. And it took me a very long time to become angry about that. I had lost it all, and I'm sitting there looking at myself as like another failure. Like, I failed again in this aspect of my life. Like, I was doing so good, and I had so much independence, and I gotten so many things together, but I couldn't figure out this one aspect of my life. So I went into a 12-step. I got to the 12-step program. And here's the thing that I won't talk in depth about my 12-step program. I'll just talk a little bit about like my journey to rediscovering a higher power, because I think that might be of interest to people that are, recently left or thinking about leaving. Like, what do you do? Like, because
I really liked what you said about how your belief in higher power is really tainted at this point.
Yes.
Any higher power.
Any higher power. And so what had happened is that I was running completely on we call it self-will in the 12-step program. And so I was running completely on this idea. And you can tell, like, from what I've told you about just now, that like everything was motivated by like, well, what can I do for myself? Like, how can I get to the next place for myself? Like, what do I need to survive? And so, it's one thing to survive, but it's another thing to be completely self-centered. And that's what had happened to me, because I had no concept of something that was greater than me. It was just me. It was just me, because that's what I had. That's what I had. That's what I had to rely on. It was just me. And so this concept in the 12 steps, which they call God, and a lot of I had a sponsor early on that was like, and I told him, I was like, this God stuff's not going to work for me. I don't understand. I don't think that I can make that work. And he was like, well, you're conflating religion with spirituality, and the 12-step program is a spiritual program, not a religious program. Mm-hmm. And that was the first, again, like I had one of these like moments where somebody swapped the perspective for me, and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Like, I can be on a path to spirituality without being tied to a religious doctrine or religious dogma. Anywhere that it says God, if you just replace it with an idea of a higher power, and the higher power only has to be greater than yourself, right?
Greater than yourself.
Greater than yourself, yes. And this is, again, like, I am just regurgitating some 12-step knowledge. This is not
true. Yeah, but would you say addiction is selfish? Because again, if it's a disease,
sure.
how is something you're afflicted with selfish?
Oh, well, see, this is where like addiction becomes kind of a gray area. I think I'm not a physician, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but there's, it's not like a disease that you can diagnose, right? It doesn't come from like, you can't get a test and find out you're a drug addict. It comes from a self-diagnosis. So that's why there's no real treatment plan for it, right? Because it can't be necessarily medically traced or anything.
I see.
And again, I know very little about the
right
scientific side of all of it. But what I do know is that I was a person that was completely self-centered and self-focused, and what I needed was to look outside of myself to grow. And so that's what I found in the 12-step program. And I always joke that, like, yes, I went from one cult to another, but at least this cult is allowing me to be my best version of myself. Yeah. So I was able to, higher power, I was able to start to think about higher power as, in the beginning, like I thought about the 12-step group as kind of like a consciousness that was much more powerful. Like, that group of people was much more powerful than me by myself, and you could say that about any type of community, like a community of people that have your best interest at heart, and you have to trust that. Like, you have to trust that they have their best interest at heart, because Jehovah's Witnesses are our community, but they have, somebody else's best interest at heart. So I found this community that had my best interest at heart, because they were all striving for something better for themselves. And so I put my trust in that higher power for a long time. And through the years, it's gradually like changed and evolved. And what I have found is that the less I define my higher power, the closer I am to it. So as long as I know that like there's something out there that's bigger and greater than me, currently it's the universe. Like, the universe is a really powerful force. Like, there's so much about it that we don't know as human beings, but things always seem to be moving in the right direction. Like nature always repairs itself. Like, there's this universal energy that's always kind of moving forward. And so I call that my higher power. It's bigger than me. I can choose to be a part of it and move with the flow, or I can choose to butt against it and be like, dig my heels in and be like, well, I want this for myself. Right.
Would you say at this point then you were getting away from atheism, or you were trying to marry the two of them together?
So what I found is that by general definition, an atheist is somebody that doesn't believe in a deity, right? And so I still don't, like, by all regular purposes of how people talk about, God, I don't believe in that system. But I definitely have a belief system in something greater than me. So I would say that I'm a spiritual person, rather than an atheist or an agnostic, because I think I feel like all of those labels are very much tied into a belief system in a deity style God, which I just don't have.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
But see, here's the wonderful thing, though, about being in a 12-step program with that belief system, is that just because I believe that way and that's worked for me to get sober, doesn't mean that, like, you can't believe in a deity style God.
Right.
Like, I have sponsees that believe in God. Like, they go to very affirming churches that are very, like, loving and caring and accepting of their LGBT identities. And they believe in a deity style God that works for them. And that's, again, like, this is such a different mindset from being a Jehovah's Witness, where there's only one way to think about God.
And it's interesting, though, because when people do leave the organization, people are looking for something to believe in. Sometimes you're looking for a place to, refocus your energy. You're looking for some kind of a surrogate or a replacement community, if not a replacement belief. So yes, you go from such a hardcore black and white way of thinking to this ambiguous nothingness. It's really hard to flip-flop from one to the other.
It is hard. And I think that that's why I latched on to the idea of atheism so early on, because it was defined for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I was used to having my relationship with a higher power, my relationship with spirituality defined by a set of rules and parameters that some person made for me. Right. And so, when you, like you said, when you leave, you're like, what do I do with all this?
Right.
I'm glad that I chose atheism, because it allowed me to kind of be open to other ideas. And, like, I integrate all types of beliefs from, like, Buddhism and Taoism or even Wiccan, like, oh my goodness, Wiccan, that is the devil's magic is a Jehovah's Witness, right? But it's very much about being in touch with the earth and with nature. And it has very little to do with quote unquote Satan.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It wasn't until I started unsubscribing from JW ideology that I started really looking into meditation, and I really appreciated mindfulness. And
I love mindfulness.
Oh my God, looking into your own body and just appreciating not knowing is something that I love, and it's made me such an open person to. I wasn't conscious of how, when I would speak to people in the ministry, I wasn't really out to listen to them. I wasn't really out to understand them. I was listening for my next turn to speak. Right. I wasn't listening for, if anything, on the outside of the organization, for those who do believe in Jesus, the way Jesus was taught to us, I'm more like that than when I was in.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, because your intention today is about like letting someone be heard so that you can have an experience with them rather
Mhm.
than trying to give them an experience, you know?
Give them an experience.
Yeah,
I love that. That's a really great way to put it. Thank you for that.
and
Wow.
you're welcome. Like so much of what is wonderful about being out of the religion is this ability to like think and choose what works for you, you know? And you can say that about your higher power. You can say that about like um, you know, I don't know, anything and everything. Like everything was so prescribed for us as Jehovah's Witnesses that the freedom that comes from like being able to say, oh, I like this idea. I like this idea and it resonates with me and it brings me closer to feeling complete and whole and fulfilled in life. With my family, like I said, I had a lot of years where it was fueling my addiction. It was the reason, you know, it became like the reason I would justify my use. Um, and it was only in those moments that I was allowing myself to have any type of emotional connection to my relationship with them. I gave them a lot of passes, like I mentioned, and it took me getting sober and doing some work on relationships to really start to move through the emotional cycle of grief, really was what it is, you know. And so I there was a few years in early recovery where I was just really angry with them, and you know, like just a lot of like I can't believe that you would do something like this to your family, to your child. And so much of my energy was tied up into my relationship with my non-relationship rather with my mom and dad. And the longer I stayed sober, the less times I reached out to contact them. So my communication with them was becoming way more sporadic. You know, because I wasn't having these like drunken changes of heart about the boundaries and the parameters of what the relationship were. So about, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was working with a therapist and working on some family trauma issues. And one of the things that had come up for me early on in recovery, but it was coming up again in my sessions, was that I was having a really hard time with forgiveness and what forgiveness looked like, because in my mind, I kept thinking that if I were to forgive them, it would be the same as if I said what they did to me was okay. Like if I say I forgive you, it's okay. Like as if those were the same statement. And so what my therapist had me do was actually research what forgiveness actually is and what forgiveness actually looks like. And what I found, which funnily enough, when I researched forgiveness religion, one of the first hits on Google, were, for me at least, was jw.org, and there was an article about forgiveness, and right there in very, very plain English, it was a short article, was about forgiveness is about letting go of the anger. In black and white, it says it does not mean that you condone the person's actions. And that was enough for me to like start on this journey of like, okay, well, what does forgiveness look like for my parents? And so I did this exercise where I wrote them a letter to forgive them, and I started out by first of all quoting the jw.org article and talking about like I'm writing you this letter because I need to forgive you, because I need to let go of this anger towards you. I need to move on. The letter went through like all the things that I loved about them, all the things that I remembered fondly about my parents, about my family. You know, as messed up as being a Jehovah's Witness is, you know, there was a lot of love in my family. There was a lot of, you know, I always felt cared for and protected until I was disfellowshipped. And so, and my parents modeled, you know, a fairly healthy relationship. They were very much in love, and I felt that as a kid. And so there's a lot of wonderful things that came out of my past experience with my family. And but then I laid into the fact that, like, you know, what they did was awful. Like abandoning your child is an awful thing. And there will never be a set of circumstances in which that is right, and what they did was right. So I can forgive you. I can let go of the anger around it. I can choose to not want to pick up today, to not want to get drunk today because I'm angry over you. But it's never going to mean that what you did to me was okay and fine. And then at the very end of that letter, and this again, like so much of it was written for me. What I said was that, I'm choosing to start validating myself instead of looking for you to validate me. Because so much of that anger was because I wasn't getting validation from them. I wanted them to be interested in my life. They kept giving me the signs that they were not, and it would make me angry. And so I would be left feeling very invalidated and unaccomplished and frustrated with my life. And so, today I can look at my accomplishments and the things that I have and the relationships that I have with other people and feel very much like a complete human being without needing to know that they approve of me. And so writing that letter of forgiveness and going through the act of forgiving them was crucial for me to moving on, um, you know, towards relationships that want me in them. My dad recently passed away, and I got one of those obligatory calls from my family, from my sister, to let me know that my dad had died. God, there was this kernel of hope that I don't know that I'll ever shake it off, but there was this kernel of hope that, oh, maybe this will be the time that they're going to ask me about my life or be interested in what's going on with me. And actually, the first person I reached out to was Wendy, because I was like, I know that Wendy understands. She understands all of the nuances of this. And I told Wendy on that phone call, I was like, I think I'm going to call them back and say, I'm so sorry for your loss, and kind of leave it at that. Like, let them grieve. Clearly, reaching out to me is part of their grieving process. I've already grieved this relationship. I've let go of my dad a long time ago, and that's not in a callous way, and it's not in a retribution type of way. I loved my parents. I did. I loved them. I loved my family. I don't have a relationship with them today because of the boundaries that they've placed. And so I respect those. And I've allowed to take those boundaries to help me set boundaries on where I want to be as an adult human being that is functioning on a daily basis. And what that does for me is that it opens up a lot of energy, and it allows me to be able to come to that situation that just happened with my dad and be like, you know what? I'm sorry for your loss, and it's a sad thing when you lose a parent, and I understand that. Or to my mom, I know how much love you guys had for each other, and I'm sorry for your loss. And it's not to say that I didn't go through some it didn't open up, it totally opened up a little can of worms, and I had a whole weekend where I was a little messed up in the head. But it was never about me. And I had to remind myself, and my husband helped me with this, remind myself that, again, they set the parameters. They didn't call me because they were wondering how I was doing, but they called me because an event happened. And so I take things at face value when it comes to my family today. So
It's amazing to me that you were able to throw forgiveness and kindness at this entire situation despite everything you have been through. It's inspiring.
Oh, well, thank you. Like I said before, it's not that it wasn't difficult and that it didn't bring up stuff, right? But it's been helpful to move through that process of forgiveness to be able to, I don't know, just make room for new relationships.
I remember one thing you said to me that I think will be really helpful for people viewing this is that you had grieved their loss
Yeah,
while they were still alive.
yeah, yeah.
I can relate to that because I'm grieving. We're all grieving losses of people who are still living.
Well, because it's we talked about this before in another conversation where it's it's as if I had died already, and it's almost like I was a ghost, just kind of wanting closure on their lives, but I'm never going to get it unless I create that closure myself.
Wow. I am thankful to have you back in my life again. In
Right.
one of my intros I said how I am so thankful that you forgave me.
Of
And
course.
you,
I mean, look, ugh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you right then, but there's nothing to forgive in that experience.
it doesn't feel that way when you're on this
I
end,
know,
though.
I know.
You wake up to the religion, you realize you shunned people, and
Yeah,
to hear that you have been through so much stuff, and some random girl offered you her couch. I was your friend.
yeah.
I wanted to be there for
Different
you.
circumstances. I know, I get it.
And
And I think
know
that
that I couldn't be there. I wasn't
yeah,
there for you. This is why when people say, "Oh, it's their choice to shun you."
yeah.
Yes and no. Yeah, yes
Yes
and
and
no.
no. Yes and no. Right. Yeah. And I think that what you are experiencing is absolutely legit in that, like, yes, like you look back on it and it's like, oh, this is like what I did was wrong. And so sure, like I forgive you. I forgive you 100% for that. And I appreciate you acknowledging that. And I think that that's kind of the only thing, like that's all it would take for family or anybody else. All this time, I've been waiting. I've been waiting to see who would come and wake up and as soon as you do, I'm like, oh, I'm there. I got you.
And
So
I'm like that too now. I kind of,
yeah,
because we practice empathy and compassion, and we never forget where we came from. And it's funny because once you leave and you let go of all that toxicity, when you when you find all these relationships that you were coerced into letting go of, we've kind of all come back
yeah,
to our starting point again.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm honored to not only have you on the channel, but have you in my life. For anyone to reach out to Steve, you're missing out if you don't know him. And so thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Thanks for having me on.
All right, we'll see you next time.
All right, see ya.
Thank you so much for watching. As you can see, this is quite a story that Steve has. And despite all of it, he lives a life of forgiveness and passion and kindness and tolerance and love. Please join us for our next upload where Steve tells the rest of his story in part 2. Remember, you can always email me at wendyrenee@gmail.com if you too want to tell your story, or if you have a skill that you would like to share with our audience that you think would help. We would love to hear about it. And as always, thank you for watching.